and welcome to my art history final video project. In this video, I'm going to discuss the influence of ancient Greece on the Roman Empire by sharing the story of Aphrodite of Cnidos and Capitoline Venus. While these two marble structures display impressive iconography, they hold so much more meaning than simply portraying the goddess of love. To fully understand the symbolism of both Aphrodite of Cnidos and Capitoline Venus, it is important to learn about the stories of these pieces. I'm going to start with Aphrodite of Cnidos, as the sculpture was created during the classical Greece period. During this period, the people began to understand that while art pleases the eye, it can also teach. And because they popularized phrases like kalos kagathos and paideia to explain their idealistic values, an aesthetic developed that combined those values along with a true representation of nature. To achieve that, figures hardly displayed extreme emotions or overly realistic characterization, but instead shared expressions or mannerisms that add a sense of harmony and balance. And I know you're probably wondering, why did ancient Greece voluntarily strip their art of any characterization? Doesn't that disconnect the audience from the artwork? Surprisingly, it seemed to work for them. Those phrases that I referred to earlier can answer this confusion. You see, kalos kagathos is a Greek saying that directly translates to well done, and when you start to deconstruct it, a more honest translation would be noble or virtuous. Essentially, they believed that moral perfection went hand in hand with one's physical beauty. To cultivate a happy individual that also integrates productively into society, one had to prioritize good education and improving character. This leads me to the next phrase, paideia, which is the idea that the youth should be instilled with aristocratic values, which can be considered a factor in being a useful citizen. When one is working to push a certain behavior or mindset, the ideal outcome is often shown off and is paraded around. That is exactly what the Greeks did, as they made it a point to show a figure that represents virtuity and beauty to adopt a more healthy, harmonious, and positive way of life. With these two phrases in mind, it now makes sense as to why ancient Greek art portrays eternal youth and athleticism as opposed to more realistic images. Now onto the first piece, Aphrodite of Cnidos, which is best known for being one of the first life-size representations of the nude female in ancient Greek history. This marble sculpture was created by Praxiteles of Athens around 4th century BC, aka the classical period for Greece, and it went on to inspire a lot of different pieces throughout history. In terms of iconography, the sculpture displays Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, shown nude in contrappasto, which is the stance where weight is shifted on one leg. This was often used in classical Greek art, and it seems as she's getting ready for a bath, her left hand discards clothing and the right covers her pubic area. Her breasts are exposed and her head lifts to the left. Now, Praxiteles made two versions of this sculpture. He made a clothed version that was more censored, and the people of Kos ended up buying it as they thought the audience would find it more appropriate and more famous. But the one bought by Cnidos, which was the nude one, ended up being more famous. They ended up using that one and putting it in the temple of Aphrodite at Cnidos as a form of worship. The reason the work of Praxiteles is so famous is because female nudity was not a normal thing in ancient Greek art. The earliest introduction of nudity was the Kouros during the Archaic period. The Kouros is a naked male youth, and while that portrayal of nudity was viewed as heroic, Aphrodite of Cnidos was sexualized, and some believed Praxiteles made her provocative on purpose. As I mentioned before, artists in ancient Greece made it a point to avoid strong expressions in their pieces to maintain a theme of balance. This explains why Aphrodite shows a blank expression, as she is a god and should be viewed as perfect by the people. While there are many replicas of this sculpture, the one that best describes the connection between Greek and Roman art is the Capitoline Venus. Now, it is important to know that if not for the copies such as this one, many artists like Praxiteles would not be known due to the majority of the original art being lost. Venus to the Romans is what Aphrodite is to the Greeks, so essentially, they were both the same. They are the goddess of love, fertility, and beauty, but Rome made their own version and named her Venus. It's easy to notice that Capitoline Venus is the Roman replica of the Aphrodite of Cnidos, but to go into specifics, this sculpture mimics the contrappasto position of Aphrodite, and because a third leg for stability is needed when it's a marble sculpture, Venus balances her weight against a vessel of water, which alludes to the bath ritual associated with Praxiteles' original. Now, one of the most obvious differences between these two is that Venus's pose is reversed, and instead of one hand being on the drapes, it shields her breasts. Also, the hair is more detailed. Adding on, this replica was never displayed in a temple, but instead it resides in a circular room in the Capitoline Museum that sort of mimics the original temple of Aphrodite in Cnidos. Greece had established a culture way before the Romans had, so it's not unlikely to see that this group has been copying some traditions or aspects of its culture. The sculpture was made during the first 2 centuries of the Roman Empire, where they saw a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity known as the Pax Romana. Thanks to the first emperor of the Roman Empire, Emperor Augustus, by the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, the Romans incorporated many different forms of Greek artwork and design into their own. However, Greek sculptures were largely idealistic works of art lacking imperfections, but Roman statues focused on ideas of realism and incorporated even the unpleasant physical details of the subject. This is important to know when you're looking at the 2 sculptures because while Aphrodite is an older sculpture and no longer exists, you could see in the images that she is a lot more idealized. It's very easy to see that she is a goddess. And with Venus, she is clearly a goddess and her iconography is quite impressive, but she does have a lot more realistic virtues in her structure. In short, while yes, the Romans did come across a lot of revelations that did progress our society, Emperor Augustus was truly convinced that Greece had already perfected their aesthetic and that all he could do with it was improve it, and that's what he did. While some might view replicas such as this one to be a disgrace to ancient Greek art, I view it as a symbol of progression and adaptability. The Romans surely introduced their own style and culture, but if not for the adoration for classical Greece, we would not know nearly as much about Greek art as we do now.